I want to start with the pound. It seems like a logical place to start because we saw the pound really take a hit, come back a little bit today. What is your projection about where the pound goes next?
Well, back in January when we first looked at this issue, we argued that Brexit would take the pound to the low 120s against the dollar, up close to 90 potentially against the euro. We stick to that view, frankly. If anything, the political difficulties that we've just talked about right now actually add to the risk that that view transpires. One thing I'd point out, against the euro, the pound is only trading now almost exactly at the average level it's traded at since 2009. This is not a currency that at this level you could argue is particularly cheap against its major trading partners. So that opens up a lot of room for further downside in our view.
And further downside in the pound has really spread to much other areas of FX. The one that I key in on most is emerging markets. Steve Englander at Citigroup said that the pound is now trading like an emerging market currency. Do you agree with that?
Well, certainly when you look at the volatility of the currency, when you look at the extreme political risk, and you add on that the fact that you have a large budget deficit, you have a huge current account deficit. This is typical of what we've seen in the past in emerging market crises. And I guess this is what the Bank of England was afraid of as well when they warned markets that these would be problems that we'd have to contend with. That's why I believe there's still more downside room for the pound here.
David, I have a fun chart for you that I want to share with you, talking about emerging market and pound. Take a look at my Bloomberg here. This is a historical spread relationship between the pound and the Mexican peso. Actually, if you come inside my terminal here. So when you get to 1, that means that things are very much correlated. We're at 0.7 right now. That means that the pound and the peso are correlated. I flipped the peso and the dollar so you could really see that correlation. And David, the peso is really looked at as an EM proxy, and I thought that this really encapsulated what we've seen in the last few days.
Well, so Shahab, that is a great chart. I do think that's a terrific chart. Tell us what that really shows us. Does that show us that EM is actually doing better than we might have thought, given all of the aftermath of Brexit, or is it just the pound is doing so much worse?
Well, Mexico is a special case. It's a very liquid currency that many investors turn to hedge wider EM risk. Also, don't forget, Mexico has problems that we call Trumpsit that aren't so different to what we're talking about in the UK.
As in Donald Trump? As
in Donald Trump, in the sense that if Donald Trump really does mean it when he says they need to renegotiate NAFTA, or that he plans to do that, Mexico would be the biggest loser. So it's just something to bear in mind when we think about Brexit, that there are countries that have similar problems. Now, what I would say, though, is if you look at some other currencies like the Russian ruble, the Brazilian real, they've actually done very well since this event happened. And one thing we may be seeing here is convergence of political risk. Russia and Brazil both were hit hard by political risk. But FX is a relative game, and you've maybe seen some political risk convergence between Europe on the one hand and those countries on the other. So some trades we're recommending right now, for example, are going short the euro against currencies like the Brazilian real and the Russian ruble.
And in the meantime, there's a small country called China on the other side of the world, and they've taken some action just today with respect to the yuan and the offshore. What is going on with the yuan, and how much is it under siege because of the strengthening dollar?
I think the Chinese authorities are fine with the idea of the yuan falling against this trade-weighted basket. Over the course of the year so far, it's already down about 6%. And that helps them deal with the weakness that the Chinese economy is showing. On the other hand, they don't want it to fall too quickly in an unstable way, and that probably explains why there were, if it's true, there was intervention in the offshore market.
And just to show, that white line is the offshore yuan. As it rises, it means the yuan is actually weakening, and that blue line is the onshore, and that's sort of the gap that you're referring to.
That's right. When that gap gets big, that basis widens, the market tends to worry that unsettling instability is coming through. They try and fight that.